Hello everyone, this is my video for the short half-day tanks multiplayer game with learning cycles. So this project is broken into 13 learning cycles, which we can see here, and we're going to go through each one of these and see how they work within the project. Okay, so we're starting off by setting up the actual project, so we'll open up the sort of starter project here, and we're going to want to make sure that we open this scene called starting scene. All right, we already have the light baked for this. If that's not working, then I would highly encourage everyone to bake light right now, which is going to keep things working very easy later on. So I just popped over here and turned off auto and manually build my baking. That's not necessarily a step, but just, this should work for everyone, but if it doesn't, just rebake real quick. All right, so then I'm going to go to my prefabs folder. I'm going to locate the tank prefab here, and I'm just going to click and drag it into my hierarchy, which will place it right here in the middle of my scene. And I can see that the tank is already set up with a rigid body, box collider, things like that. It already also has some tracks, some dust trail here that's going to make it leave dust when it moves around. So then I'm going to go to my scripts folder, and I'm going to locate the tank controller script, previously the object mover rigid body script, and I'm just going to click and drag that onto my tank. And I can leave all this stuff the same. This is its movement speed, its turn speed, camera, distance, and height. I'll talk about here. Let's go ahead and open this script up. These scripts are all fully commented, so if something doesn't make sense, you can just check it out. So instead of each tank having its own camera, what we're going to do is instead we're going to have the one main scene camera that the local tank or our main tank is just going to grab and control. That way we don't have to manage multiple cameras. And so we have our normal movement stuff here, and then we just need to know, hey, how far back should the camera be? How high off the ground should the camera be? So we just have some variables for that there. In our start method, we get a reference to our rigid body. We set up just a vector 3 for our camera offset. And then we just grab our main camera. Camera.main.transform is the transform of the main camera. And then we call this method move camera. If you're wondering where camera.main comes from, if you look at your main camera, it's tagged main camera. Whenever you have a camera tagged main camera, that's your main camera. So you can just use the camera tagged as main camera, and that's what you're going to grab there. Inside move camera, you can see here that we're just basically saying, hey, let's move the camera to the tank. Let's rotate the camera to align with the tank. Let's move it back so it's back above the tank, and look at the tank, right? Pretty simple there. Inside fixed update, we just have where we're getting our inputs. You'll note that we're no longer doing, hey, if you're on mobile, get your inputs this way. Hey, if you're on non-mobile, get your inputs this way. That's the purpose of this cross-platform input manager. We just can use that, and it works no matter what platform we're on. Then we're going to go ahead and just apply a new position and a new rotation, and every physics frame, every fixed update, we're just going to move the camera. It's probably a good idea at this moment here to mention that this project has two things already imported. The first is the cross-platform input, right? And the second is these sample lobby scenes, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the cross-platform input, the way I imported those is I just went to Assets, Import Package, cross-platform input. Now, attendees won't have to do that. That's already done in this version of the project. But just be aware, that's a step I've already done. So besides the other assets, these assets are in here as well. All right, so that is the project setup here, cycle 1. I'm just going to hit play, and I can move around. You can see that we've grabbed the camera. So the main camera is not nested under the tank, but it's being controlled by that script anyway. So that allows us to just sort of get a hold of that here. All right, and so that is cycle 1. Again, we opened the project, we opened the starting scene, we dragged in the tank prefab, we applied the tank controller script, and we tested the scene, and we ensured that we're no longer in play mode. All right, so then cycle 2. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by saving my scene as. I don't want to save scene here, I'm going to save scene as, just get a new copy of the scene. And so I'm just going to save this as main gameplay. That way we still have a fresh copy of our original scene if we need it. All right, so now we are going to start setting up our local networking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object here, which I'm going to call Network Manager. And on this network manager, I'm going to add all of the stuff that we're going to need to manage our network. So I'm going to go to Add Component, Network, and I'm going to locate the Network Manager component, right? Not Network Lobby, but Network Manager. All right, and that's going to have a bunch of stuff on here we're going to talk about in a second. I'm also going to go to Add Component, Network, and then Network Lobby, or Network Manager HUD. All right, so our network manager is where we set up all of our network stuff. Basically, it manages our network. So here is where we can see all the stuff like what's our local host, what's our matchmaking service, things like that. What's spawnable? Do we want to simulate network traffic or latency? Things like that. All right, so those are pretty standard. So what we want is we want this network manager to spawn our player for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my tank here. I'm going to hit apply. That's going to save this tank controller script to the prefab. And then I'm going to go to my prefabs folder and I'm going to click and drag my tank onto the player prefab. What I'm going to notice is not going to like that very much. All right, so we can see not taking it. And the reason is that I need to specify that this tank can be on the network. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my tank and I'm going to say Add Component, Network, and on the tank I'm going to say Network Identity. Network Identity means this can be on a network. This can be synced across the network. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Apply, saving those changes to my prefab. And then I'm going to try it again. So with my prefabs folder open, I'm just going to click and drag my tank onto the player prefab, and there we go. All right, so nice and easy there. All right, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this, save my scene here, and I'm going to hit play. All right, and now what I can see is this second component, the Network Manager HUD, gives me some buttons here that just allows me to control my networking manager very simply. Ideally, I would eventually replace this with something that looks better and fits in with my game, but this is just for quick development. And so I'm just going to say, hey, let's host a LAN game, and there we go. We've got my new tank, the one the server spawned, and then we have the just original tank that was just sitting there, the one I've been working on. So let's actually see this multi-played. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my build settings, and I've got a bunch of stuff in here in my build settings right now. I'm just going to remove all of these. These are just remnants. They probably won't even be there when you guys open these assets. I'll fix that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add my open scene here, and I'm going to build for PC, Mac, and Linux, and I'll just do a Windows build, and I'm just going to say build and run. And it's going to say, okay, well, where do you want to save this? I have this build folder already, so I'll just name it game.exe in there. You can just build and save it to wherever you want. And it's going to build. And I want to make sure that this is windowed and fairly small. That way I can have both on the screen at the same time. So 640 by 480, windowed. And I'm going to hit play. And it's going to start up here. And while that's starting up, I'm going to go ahead and hit play here. And so I'm going to host the game here. There we go. And now on this one, I'm going to join as a client. All right. Boom, and I get shot way up into the air. And the reason is they spawned on top of each other. All right, so they spawned directly on top of each other, and so that is no good. And so we got thrown way into the air, which is super fun. And we're going to fix that in the next step. So for now, our step here, step 2, we created the network manager. We added the network manager component, the network manager hub component, HUD component. We added the network identity to the tank prefab. We added the tank prefab to the spawn, and we built and tested and saw it go absolutely nuts. All right. So this next step, the next cycle, we're going to we're going to create some spawn points. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to create empty, and I'm going to rename this spawn point. I'm also going to give this an icon, right? So, and I like these icons instead of the ovals because you can see when they go into the ground, right? So that helps us figure out whether they're above ground or below ground. You can see that right there. All right, so yeah. And so what I'm going to do just for now is I'll just go ahead and just maybe place this here, give it a bit of a rotation. And what I'm going to do now that I have my spawn point in place is I'm going to add a component to it that's going to allow things to spawn on it. So I'm going to go to Add Component, Network, and then I'm going to choose Network Start Position right here. network start position. Now, there's nothing I need to do with that, but that just means it can be spawned on. And I'm going to go ahead and just create a couple of these. All right, so I'm just going to have 4 of them. So I'll put another one over here with some rotation, and let me just move maybe one over yonder. Here we go. And then one more, because eventually we could have up to 4 players. So, and I know there's a big level here, so I guess I could spread it out a bit, but there you go. So those are our spawn points, and that certainly works. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on my network manager, and I'm going to tell it how to use these spawn points. And by default, we can see that auto create player is set up. That's how our players were created, and our player spawn method has been random. We don't want 2 tanks spawning in the same spot because they'll get projected into the air, and so instead I'm going to choose round robin. So each tank gets its own spot. All right, and so now I'm going to go ahead and build and run. And then once that is done and loading up here, I'll hit play. And so I'll hit boom. Okay, so here's my spot. And then here's this other one. Boom. All right, so now you see the camera jumped. And if I'm playing on the client here, I see this tank up here moving, right, with this tank, but I don't see any movement down here. And similarly, if I were to move here, I see these tanks moving, but they're not moving here. So something's going on. We have networking; these players are connected, but we haven't really told it how to sync some of their positions and things like that. So that's going to conclude this step, though. So that's spawn points, and what we did, we created an empty game object named spawn point. We gave it a network start position component. We made a bunch of them, and then we set our player spawn method to round robin in the network manager, and we built and ran it. Okay, so the next step, local players. So now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, which player is the local player, all right? Because each player, or each version of the game, each instance of the game is going to have many players. If I have 4 players, there's going to be 4 players on my game, 4 players on player 2's game, 4 players, so on and so forth. And so what I want to do is I want to say which of one of these tanks is the local player, right? Which one is my character versus everyone else's character. And on my character, I want to have authority over how I'm moving. I want to control my camera, right? Because I don't want other players grabbing my camera, because I don't care what they see. I want what I see, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my tank, and the first thing is I'm going to look at this network identity, and I'm going to say, you know what? I am the local authority, right? So this tank is the local player authority, which means when I'm the local player, I control my tank. The server doesn't, other players don't. I control my tank. And then when you're the local player on your end, you're the authority of your tank. And so we just can basically control our tanks. And so then what I'm going to do is, this tank controller is not going to do what I want, right? Because what it's doing is it's saying, basically, hey, every tank that starts, grab the camera. I don't want every tank that starts up to grab the camera. I only want my tank to grab the camera. And it says, okay, every tank, if I press the up key, all tanks move forward, right? Well, I don't want all tanks to move forward. I want my tank to move forward. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this tank controller script. All right, and instead, I'm going to go to my scripts folder and locate the tank controller _net for networking. All right, so this is the networked version of the script. It's very, very simple. So a couple things of note here is, and you know what, let me zoom in my code here a bit since I'm recording this video. So first things first is I'm using the Unity Engine.networking, which allows me to change it from a mono behavior to a network behavior, which gives me all the same stuff as a mono behavior, but also the networking bits as well. And then all I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, if this is not the local player, right? If I have 4 tanks, I'm controlling one of them and 3 are controlled by other players, the local player is my tank, the other 3 are not local players. If this is not a local player, just remove the script. Just destroy the script, the component. If I destroy the script, then the other players aren't going to try to control the camera. The other players aren't going to do movement. The other players aren't going to do any of that stuff, right? We don't want them to. They're doing that on their end, but we don't want it on our screen. They can have it on their screen, so when they're the local player. And so if this tank is not local, remove this tank controller script, and so it's not going to try to control anything. All right, so by doing that, and that's basically a real simple step there, I'm going to go ahead and just rebuild. All right, and then while that's starting up, I'll hit play here. And I'll host. And so first thing I'm going to notice is now that when I move my tank, this tank doesn't move. And now on this end, I'm going to hit client. And one problem I just noticed here, I'm going to have to stop and do this again. Whoops. This is going to happen a lot. I forgot. So I've made these changes to this tank here in my scene. I've got to actually apply those changes. So my bad. Let's try that again. And let me save my scene before I do that build. There we go. Now we'll see the correct behavior. The other tank didn't move because that tank had the appropriate script on it. So, okay, so now not moving. Okay, that's what we want. I knew something was wrong when the camera moved when the client joined. So there we go. Okay, so now the client is managing its own camera, and I can see the other tanks don't move when it moves. However, I will also notice I don't see the client's movement. Right? So it's controlling the camera correctly, it's not grabbing the wrong camera, and it's moving correctly, it's not moving the other tanks. However, the movement isn't being shown. All right, and we're going to solve that in the next step. All right, and so for this step, this was step 4. What we did is we activated the local player authority on the tank. We replaced the tank controller script with the tank controller net script. All right, and then we just sort of analyzed it there. Don't forget to apply your changes to the tank prefab before doing your build. So step 5, we're syncing our transforms. And so what we do here is what I'm going to start by doing is saying, hey, tank, it's good that you can control yourself and that you're spawned on the network, but you need to tell all other versions of you where you are and what you're doing. So it's not just enough that all these objects are spawned on the network. We need to say, hey, but we also want to synchronize what they're doing. All right, so the other people can see it. And so I'm going to go add component, network, and then network transform. And so this is going to synchronize my network transform. The send rate is going to say how often do I want to synchronize. 9 is okay for a tank. It doesn't move very fast. It's not super important. But basically, if I had a fast-moving object, like we'll see later, I'd want to send data over the network more often so we can really know the position of that object, right? Then how am I synchronizing? If I was moving with just a transform, I'd do that. 2D rigid body, I'd do that. Character control, I'd do that. But since I'm using a 3D rigid body for all my motion, that's the data I'm going to send, all right? And then we have movement threshold, how much movement counts as movement, and snapping, and interpolation, and all that. You don't want to turn interpolation up on this object because if you interpolate more than what it's moving, it's going to look choppy, right? So leave interpolation the way it is. Now for rotation, I could sync all the rotation of this tank. However, the tank only rotates about its y-axis. I don't want to send too much data, right? Because that's going to bog down my bandwidth. So I'm going to choose Y top-down 2D. All right. And so now if I go ahead and hit apply and then save my scene and build it, we're going to notice one slight problem here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play there, hit play here. For the most part, it's going to be working fairly well. I'm going to come over here and join as a client. And so let's look what we see here. So first off, we can see that my position is being synchronized now. But when I turn, you'll notice the lag on the turning. And that's problematic. That's going to give us graphical issues where bullets are coming from the side of the tank and things like that. So the last thing I want to do for this step here to fix that is I'm going to go back to my tank, and for the rotation, my interpolate rotation, I'm going to change this to 15, saying, yes, interpolate very quickly on our rotation. Now, I'm not going to go higher than 15 because, again, if my interpolation is too high for a slower moving object, it gets choppy. And so I'm just going to leave this at 15. 15 is a good number for this. Also, if we want our data to be, even smaller, I can compress my rotation. So I'm going to do that because why not save as much bandwidth as possible? So compressing my rotation there. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And so I could build and show you again, but all that, we'll see it next time we do a build. So that's step 5, synchronizing transforms. We add a network transform component to the tank. We change its rotation to top-down 2D, and we give it an interpolation rotation factor of 15. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to look at how we could maybe change the way our network manager looks or works, right? So the network manager is basically what controls a lot of our stuff, but what if we wanted to have it do more, right? Maybe control our game in a unique way. Maybe we had multiple cameras. We wanted to turn one off when the player started and then turn it back on when the player was done, like a lobby spectator or something like that. So we have a lot of control to do that. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up this script called network manager _ camera control. And what we're going to see here is that, again, it's using Unity Engine networking. And this time, it is not a mono behavior. It's not a network behavior. It extends network manager, all right, which is that component we have on our network manager here. And what this is going to enable us to do is this is going to enable us to have methods like onStart client, onStart host, onStop client, onStop host. And this particular script, what it's going to do is when we're not playing the game, right, it's going to just sort of rotate our camera around the scene. And so we're going to have a field for the scene camera. We're going to have a field for how basically the radius of that rotation, how fast does it rotate, and then this Boolean can rotate. And so when the game starts, we're going to say, you know what, stop rotating, right? Because the game has started, the players are playing, and they're controlling their camera. But when the game stops, just say, okay, no one's playing right now, go ahead and rotate, right? And that's going to grab that. And inside update here, we just basically say, hey, if we can't rotate, leave. And if we can rotate, let's calculate a rotation and let's rotate our camera. All right. And so what I'm going to do here is on the network manager game object, on the network manager component, this bottom variable or property script, right, where it says network manager, I can put a new network manager here, and that'll replace this component with my version, but it will maintain the tank and all of my settings. And so I'm just going to click and drag my network manager _ camera control onto here, and what I'm going to see is it kept all the same stuff here, which is good. See my tank still there and all this stuff. However, it now added my scene camera, camera rotation, radius, speed, and can it rotate. So I'm just going to click and drag my main camera and just drop it right on there. And now I'm going to go ahead and save my scene and hit play. When I'm not playing the game, my camera just sort of rotates, right? So there we go. We can just sort of see our level. And then when I start playing, okay, can rotate becomes false. My tank controls my camera, right? And then I play my game, whatever, and I say, okay, I'm done playing. Let's go back to, our basic state. Maybe you can call it a lobby, though the lobby is going to mean something else here soon. And then it starts rotating the camera again. So, we can just sort of have a nice way to override that network manager to do new things that we want it to do. So for this step, real short step, we just replace the network manager script with the network manager _ camera control script. And then we drag and drop the main camera onto the scene camera property. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to start shooting. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to my tank. Now normally this won't already be done, but it's currently done right now. I want to add a gun barrel game object. So normally I'd go create empty, name it gun barrel, and then position it. So I've already done that step. We want to position it outside of the collider of the tank so the tank doesn't shoot itself. Also, by giving it an arc, the shell is going to arc. If we want it to go straight, the shell won't go as far, but it won't also go over enemies. It's just personal preference. But the gun barrel just exists to just be some location. Once that's done, on my tank here, I'm going to go ahead and add the tank shooting script. So I'm going to go add component, scripts, tank shooting. Right there, and the power 800, I'm going to leave that. Shell prefab, it says, okay, what am I shooting here? So I'm going to go to my prefabs, And I have a shell prefab right here. I'll take a look at that in a second. And then gun barrel is already filled in. So let's take a look at the tank shooting script real quick to see how this stuff works. So this is currently on mono behavior with just power of 800, shell prefab, gun barrel. I'm using the reset method here because doing things like finds are a bit slower, and even though we use them in a few places, doing them not at runtime is much better. So this is how I'm finding the gun barrel with the name gun barrel. If you named it something else, that won't be found and you'll have to manually drag it on. In update, basically I'm saying, hey, if you use jump or fire one, so touching the screen, hitting spacebar, click the mouse, whatever, instantiate a shell, and then give it some force to send it flying. All right. So now that I've done that, let's take a look at the shell real quick. So I'm going to go to my prefabs folder, and I'm going to click on the shell. And I'm going to see that the shell is just basically a mesh renderer with a capsule collider and a rigid body, right? Just a shell. Now to the shell, I'm going to go ahead and add another script. So I'm going to go to my scripts, and to the shell, I'm going to add the shell controller. And mostly I'm doing this just to show you what a simple version versus a network version looks like. But on the shell controller, it's going to have a lifetime, a boolean, can it kill, is it currently live, how old is it, and a reference to some explosion particles in a shell renderer. And so in start, we're just going to get references to the mesh renderer of it and the particle system. In update, we're going to say, hey, how old is this? If it's too old, destroy it, right? It has a certain lifetime. And then on collision enter. So when this hits something, if it's not live, don't do anything. That way the shell can't hit something multiple times. If the shell, or now that the shell has hit something, it's no longer live, right? So we can't run this more than once. When we've hit something, turn off its mesh renderer, show its particle effect, right? So we see it explode. And then if it can't kill, or it didn't hit a player, just leave because we don't care about it. If it can kill and it hits a player, then find that player's tank health, which doesn't exist yet. And if that tank health exists, tell it to take damage. All right, so that's a basic shell script there. And it's just right there on the shell prefab now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to see localhost here. I can run around, I can shoot, and, oh, right. Also, I should hit apply on my tank, so that applies to both of my tanks there. So now I can shoot. So we notice the same problem we've had before, right? Both tanks are shooting, right? And that's obviously something we want to resolve. Also, if I were to build this right now and run it, what I would see is that my local tank shoots, but my network tank does not shoot. So this is not currently networked. This is basically a standalone whatever. And the next step, we're going to make it networked. So for this step, what we did is we added the gun barrel. We added the tank shooting script to the tank prefab. We looked at the shell, and we added that to the shell prefab of tank shooting, and then we add the shell controller script to the shell prefab. That's going to get our local shooting working correctly. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to see, okay, what does it take to actually make this networked? So we can shoot locally. How do we shoot networked? And so now that we know kind of what these scripts do, let's take a look at the shell controller _net. And so if I'm looking, I'm sorry, the tank shooting _net. Jumped ahead there a second. And so if I look at tank shooting, right, it's a very simple script. It's mono behavior, all that stuff. Tank shooting.net, just now it's a network behavior, right? And all of the same properties here, the same reset, all that same stuff. Now inside update, if we say, hey, if you're not the local player, leave, right? You can't shoot. Only the local player can shoot, all right? That way we don't have any issues where multiple players are shooting whenever you hit the spacebar. Now, if we hit the fire one or press the jump bar or whatever, we're no longer just instantiating a shell and sending it flying. Instead, we are calling a command. Run the server command to spawn. That should say cannonball. That should say shell. I'll fix that. Used to say cannonball. So command spawn shell. So a command is saying, hey, if you're the local player, which you are, right? That's fine, but you're a local player, not the server. The server is where we're doing things that the player does not control, right? Like the tank. Yeah, the tank says, hey, it's time to fire a shell, but the tank should not control that shell. I should not control the shells of my tank because I could cheat, right? Or, I could get out of sync or whatever. The server really should manage anything that's not really the player. And so when I say command spawn shell, it calls a command on the server. And the server is going to say, oh, okay, let's spawn a shell. And I'll notice that commands have to start with CMD. Okay, so let's spawn a shell. So now the server is going to do basically what the player would have done. Game object, instantiate, shell prefab, add some force to it, right? That's the same code. Okay. However, now that the server has instantiated its local copy, it needs to put it on the network so everyone can see it. And so we say network server spawn, and we pass in that instance. This puts it on everybody's screen. All right, so that is the networked version of that. And so on my tank, I'm going to go ahead and remove my tank shooting script. Goodbye. And we're going to add the tank shooting net script. Again, we need to say, hey, what's our shell prefab? So I'll just put shell on there, and there we go. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and tell basically the shell how it's going to update. If I were to just run it like this, the tank would shoot its shells and they would appear on everyone's client, but they would only disappear on mine. They would only be destroyed on mine. And the reason, I'm going to go to the shell and we're going to see this. I'm also going to, before I forget, hit apply on my tank there. The reason is if I look at my shell and I look at my shell controller, it's not a networked controller, right? It's not a network thing. And so I'm going to look at the shell controller and it's just saying, hey, inside update, if it's too old, destroy it, right? And that's all local. Right? It's a mono behavior. We're going to end up replacing that with this shell controller.net. Again, a network behavior. All right? We've had a couple things in here. We also have a Boolean for is deathmatch, which I'll talk about here shortly. But otherwise, it's exactly the same, except instead of a local update, we are now doing a server callback update, which basically means only run this update method for the shell on the server. The server is going to keep track of these shells. And the server is going to say, hey, if this is too old, right, destroy it. Not locally, but destroy it on the entire network. So it disappears from everyone's screen. Now, something that is different here is on collision enter. This is all the same, except if this is the server, or this is not a server. So if not server, leave. Only the server can deal with the bullets hitting something. Now, we can let non-servers run this code because everyone should be able to see the shells exploding, not just the server. So this happens on everyone's machine. Did it hit something? Cool, explode. But if it's the server, then deal with actually giving out damage. Now later we're going to have a deathmatch version which is going to have a different tank health, which is why we have that if statement here. But the code in here is pretty much exactly the same. Just a deathmatch is going to use tank health underscore deathmatch, and a non-deathmatch won't. So that's that difference right there. Okay, so on my shell, I'm going to go ahead and remove that shell controller, and I'm going to add this shell controller.net. All right, but I'm going to leave everything else the same. I'm not going to check can kill. I'm not going to check deathmatch. I'm just going to leave that all how it is. All right. And so now, if I go ahead and with all this stuff saved, I'm going to go ahead and build and run. This step isn't done yet. I want to illustrate one more issue. All right, and so I'm going to do a build and run here. I'm going to do a play here. All right, localhost. All right, client. So what's going to happen is when I shoot, all right, I'm not seeing it kind of behave the way I think it's going to behave. On my client here, I don't see any bullets, but I see them on my server on this screen. And that seems odd. I'm shooting them from here. Why can't I see them? All right. And I can see them here. Inversely, if I shoot from here, again, I don't see them over here. All right. And so there's a couple reasons for that. All right. There's a couple culprits. So the first off is that the network manager doesn't know it can spawn these things. We have to tell the network manager ahead of time, hey, by the way, I'm going to spawn these things later. And so if I click on the network manager, I can see here registered spawnable prefabs. I'm going to go ahead and add one. So I'm going to go to my shell or prefabs, and I'm going to tell it, hey, I can spawn these shells at runtime. All right, and so there we go. I'll just drop the shell on there. Now, I can see here we've got this network identity, which is going to maintain that it can be on the server. The network identity was added when I added this shell controller script. It's a network behavior, so Unity automatically applied that network identity. So now I'm going to go ahead and build it again. And run it here. And we will, I will say you are the host, you are the client. All right, so let's try this again now. So I'm moving closer. Now I'm shooting. All right. Well, again, this is interesting. The bullets are all just kind of detonating right here in front of me, but on the other screen, they're flying forward. On this one here, if I were to come forward, I'd see them shooting here. And it's hard to kind of show both at the same time because they'll get closed. But I see, them just sort of stumbling at the mouth of the gun again. So something kind of wrong there. So the last thing I need to do is, the shells are being instantiated on the network, and we can see them now because of their network identity and they're registered. But we're not, just like when the tanks wouldn't move, even though I could see them moving, we need to say, hey, shell, you need to tell us what your transform is, right? You need to update that so we can see it. The reason I saw it correctly on this screen here was because this is the server, so it's seeing the right ones. It's the host, right? So I'm going to go add component, network, and on the shell, I'm going to add the network transform. Now I know this is off the screen, so you can't, the recorded screen, so you can't see it. Sorry about that, but I'm adding the network transform here. And so this is going to synchronize its rotation. I'll compress that rotation. It's going to synchronize its rigid body position. Since this is a fast moving shell, I am actually going to just crank up the send rate because it's crucial that these are accurate. These are our bullets, right? And this is a fighting game, right? So we need that to be accurate. So now I'm going to save this. I'm going to do a quick build. And then let's play there, play here. I will set this up as the host. I will set this up as the client. And now shells are flying correctly on both screens. Okay, fantastic. So that's that step. It seemed like a longer step only because I took a lot of time explaining it, but the steps are actually quite simple. Replace the tank shooting script with the tank shooting _net script on the tank. Add a network identity to the shell, which will happen automatically if you don't do it when you replace the shell controller with the shell controller _net version. Then on the shell, we need to register it as a spawnable object on the network manager, and we need to add a network transform to the shell so it's synchronized. All right. So that is going to conclude local networked play. All right. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to start adding a lobby. We're going to look into matchmaking. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my network manager and my tank. And now instead of saving this scene, I don't want to save this scene right now because I want this clean version of my scene with the LAN game. So I'm going to save this as. All right, I probably should have saved as before deleting that stuff, but what are you going to do? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this gameplay matchmaking. I didn't have to save this as a new scene, but again, I wanted to have a clean version of my LAN game in case I ever want to go back to it and keep playing around with it. So I'm saving this just as a new version. All right, and so now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene again, and I'm going to save that as, and I'm going to go to my scenes folder, and this is going to be my lobby scene. I'm going to add a lobby for my matchmaking. I could have done it all from that other screen, but the lobby's cool, and then we want to take a look at that. And so now that I'm in my lobby scene, which is basic right now, I'm going to go to File, Build Settings. I'm going to remove this main gameplay, since we're not doing that anymore. I'm going to go ahead to my scenes folder, and I'm going to add my lobby. And I'm going to add my gameplay matchmaking in that order. I want lobby first. Okay, so now they're part of my build settings. If we don't add these to our build settings now, we're going to have errors later. All right, so it's important to add them now. Okay, and so that's going to be this cycle here. Matchmaking part 1, where we remove the tank and network manager from our scene, save the scene as gameplay _matchmaking, create a new scene saved as lobby, and then we're going to add the lobby and the gameplay matchmaking to our build settings. All right. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and still continuing on step 9, but just another cycle within it, is now we're going to set this up here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new empty game object, which I'm going to call Network Manager. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and add to this not a network manager, but a network lobby manager, which is very similar, but now it's going to manage a lobby with players having to ready up and things like that. And so I'm also going to add to this the network HUD, network manager HUD there. Again, this is the same one as last time, just it's going to give us our buttons and everything. All right. So our network manager needs to know what the player is, but also needs to have a prefab for our lobby player, right? The player that's just chilling in the lobby, in case we want to give them the ability to chat or move around or whatever. We're going to keep this simple. So I'm going to create an empty game object named lobby player. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and add to this, go to network. I'm going to add to this a network lobby player component, which is just going to say, hey, do you want to see the UI of the lobby and whatever. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn this lobby player into a prefab and delete it from my scene. I just need something to represent the player while they're in the lobby. Now on my network manager, I'm going to say, okay, what's my lobby player? Well, that's my newly created lobby player. What's my game player? Well, that's my tank. How am I spawning? Well, I'm going to spawn round robin, just like we did with the other network manager. And can I spawn any prefabs? Yes, I can. I can spawn shells. There we go. All right. And so now this step is more or less done. Let's try it out. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I forgot to say, hey, what's my lobby scene and what's my play scene? That's important. So the lobby scene is this lobby we just created. And the play scene is our gameplay matchmaking scene. All right. So if I go ahead and hit play right now, I don't have matchmaking just yet. But what I can do is I can just still do like a LAN host, and now I can see that I have this ready up, right? And if someone else were to join, they'd have to ready up and so on and so forth. I can have a bunch of players, and then when I'm ready, I can just hit start and we're playing the game. Okay. So for that step, what we did is we created a new game object, named it Network Manager. We added a Network Lobby Manager and Network Manager HUD component to it. We created a new game object, and we added a Network Lobby Player to it. We turned it into a prefab and deleted it from the scene. We filled in the lobby scene, play scene, lobby player, and game player fields on the Network Lobby Manager. We added the shell to the spawnable prefabs, and then we changed our spawn method to round robin. Okay. So in the next part, we're going to actually get the multiplayer service up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the cloud icon here for services. Now, the first time we click on this, it's going to say, hey, create a project ID, and you can just say, yeah, create one. Now I've already done that, and so for me, I'm seeing the services window, and what I would do then is click multiplayer and then go to the dashboard. And of course, this requires internet, so here we can just see that this is all turned on and everything, and I would turn this off and do a demo of it live, but I just didn't want to do that here in the video. And then once we have that configuration here, we're set up. This is a short step. It could be longer. People have to create an account, or they can just utilize this multiplayer version of Project ID if we're sharing that out. It's kind of up to whoever's doing the teaching. But that step is basically just, hey, we're going to set up the service through the cloud dashboard. And that can be short, that can be long. If there's no internet, that's going to be really difficult. But it all really just depends there. All right, and so now what we want to do is we want to give this a nice lobby, because our lobby here kind of looks like crap. So I've already imported the nice lobby, but just to show everyone where that comes from, if you go to the asset store and you search for, I think you can just search for lobby. Yeah, network lobby right here. I've just imported this package here. So lobby, right? And that just brings in a bunch of files and stuff like that. This is already done, but in case anyone wants to know where that came from, that's where it came from. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this folder that's part of that sample there, sample scenes, and I'm going to go into the scenes folder, and I'm going to open network lobby. And I can see I get this nice looking network lobby example here, all right? And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to File, Build Settings, and I'm going to remove this old lobby, right, from my build settings. I'm going to just add this new one, and I'm going to move it to the top. All right, so I'm going to use my nice looking lobby here. On the lobby manager, what I'd like to do is I'm going to go ahead. There's a whole bunch of stuff on here, but it still just has a lobby manager, just like we've seen. It's a custom version, but still a lobby manager. So all of this stuff should be normal. And then here's just some extra stuff that was built as part of that example. All right. And so on here, I need to say, okay, what's my lobby scene? What's my play scene? How many players can I have? All this stuff. And so what I'm going to do is my lobby scene is this lobby scene. That's good. My play scene is this gameplay matchmaking. Drop it right on there. All right. Maximum players. This by default is 2. I had set it up to 1 earlier so that we can test out here. I'll set that back to 2 for now. What's our lobby player? I'm going to leave that just as it is. I'm not going to use the one I made. I'm going to use their lobby player because it has a bunch of extra stuff in it. And then what's my game player? And I'm going to go to my prefabs, and that is my tank. All right. What's my player prefab? I can leave this blank because it's going to get that from here, or I could fill it in. Spawn method is going to be round robin. And then can I spawn any prefabs? I can. I can spawn a shell. All right. And so now, if I go ahead and save and build this, I'll build it once here, and then I'll hit play here. And so now I could do matchmaking here. For now, I'm just going to do well, you know, I'll do matchmaking. So input a name, my room. All right, and I will hit create. So that's creating my room over here. This is someone else playing, and they're going to say, I'm not going to create a room, and let me list the servers. Hey, my room. Okay, there's 1 of 4 people in there right now. Let me join that. Okay, so it's going to connect them. This can take a second since I'm not in full live mode. So there we go. So now I can see player 1 and player 2. And so player 2 is this player here. I'm going to say join. And here we go. The match is starting. And so now we have our game. Okay, something I forgot to do real quick before we move on, which prevents this from working here. So on my lobby manager, so one thing is I accidentally changed max players per connection, and when I meant to change minimum players, that's superficial, whatever. But what I forgot to do here is I forgot to remove this network lobby hook. This is going to make it not work right now. We're going to utilize something like this later, but for now, I'm going to go ahead and just remove that because that is not doing what we want it to do. And so now I'm going to go ahead and just rebuild here. And we're going to see it work. So apologize for that. And so let's try this again. I'm not going to get creative with my room name this time. Just whatever, create. Over here, list servers. There it is. Phew. So now when I change minimum players, because I had the wrong one previously, so now when I hit join, it's just going to ready me up. All right, so instead of just joining right away, and so now everyone in the match has to be ready before it can start. And so now by removing that network lobby hook, now I've got my network game working the way I want. Okay. So now we have our nice network lobby there. So just to kind of iterate again on the network lobby, basically just set up the lobby scene, play scene. Game player prefab is the tank, added the shell here, remove that hook. That's important because that prevents it from working. So for this step, what we do is we open the scene network lobby, we select the lobby manager, we fill in the play scene and game player prefabs, and then we add the shell prefab to the register spawnable prefabs, and we change the player spawn method to round robin, and we remove the network lobby hook. One other step that should be in here is to inbuilt settings, switch lobby scene for network lobby scene. All right, and that is all bolded, which we don't want. Okay. Just to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date version of this PowerPoint, which will be with the project with this video and stuff like that. So there we go. So that was this step here. Okay, and so now we have our nice lobby. Let's look at that lobby hook and kind of what it did or what it does. And so if I run this real quick here, and I'm just going to do a local, I can see that I have the ability to give myself a name. I have the ability to change my color, stuff like that. Now, I'm not going to bother setting up the name part, but I do want to mess around with the color bit. And so what I'm going to do, is I'm going to go ahead and look in my scripts folder at this tank color and tank color hook. So tank color is a script I'm going to put on my tank. And what it effectively does is it just says, okay, we have this thing called a sync var, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's going to say, okay, find all mesh renderers on this tank, iterate through them, and set them to whatever color this variable color is. Sync var means it's a variable that's going to be synced across all versions of this tank on the network. All right. And so just to kind of show you, I'm going to comment this out for now, just for demonstration, right? So I'm going to come over here to my prefabs folder. I'm going to click on my tank, and I'm going to go ahead and add that tank color script. All right, so I'm going to go to Scripts, Tank Color. Now, on my lobby manager, we had that network hook previously, but now what I'm going to do is instead, I'm going to add my own custom one, tank color hook. All right, and let's take a look at that script. So the tank color hook basically says, it extends this thing called lobby hook, which is created as part of this example. And it's going to say on lobby server scene loaded 4 players. It's a long method name. It's going to have what's my manager, what's my player, what's my game object. And so all we're saying is, hey, lobby player, or find the lobby player, find this tank color script and just say, hey, lobby player, what color did the player select? Make my tank that color. So it's pretty simple there. And so if I try this out right now, all right, so I'll go ahead and build this. So remember, I commented out that sync var. All right, so if I hit play and I hit play here, all right, and so I'm just going to do local. We saw that the networking works, but local is faster. And so I will just join that, and I will ready up here and ready up there. And so my colors are red and this teal. And so what I'm going to see is on my server, my tanks are red and teal, but on my client, they are just black, right? So the color was never set correctly. And the reason is the server never synchronized those variables, all right? So let's try it again with that sync var, all right? So tank color, uncomment that out and save it. In my scene here, you can fast forward if you kind of get it, but I like to be thorough. So I'll play here, play there. And did I click play? There we go. Play and host, join, ready, ready. Okay. So now what we're going to see is the tanks are the correct colors on both screens, all right? Because it's synchronized that data across the server. Okay, so for this step, we add the tank color script to the tank prefab, add the tank color hook script to the lobby manager, and then we tried to comment and uncomment that sync var just to sort of see what happens. All right, coming down to it. Next step, second to last step, the player's health. We want to be able to win and lose this game, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my tank prefab, and I'm going to add another script to it, okay? And this one is going to be called scripts, and this one is tank health. All right, so tank health basically just says, hey, what's our maximum number of health? All right, and so if I look at the tank health script, first off, it's already a network behavior. I'm not showing a non-networked version of this. And so it's got its max health. We're going to have some information text in the start. We're going to set up our health. And so we have this function called take damage, all right? And if you recall from the shell controller, it basically says when it hits something, hey, find its tank health script, and then tell it to take damage, all right? And so in tank health, we're saying, okay, take damage. And first off, if the tank is already dead, then, leave. And if this is not the server, leave. All right, but only the server can assign damage, right? We want to keep it safe. We want to prevent any issues with hacked clients or whatever. Only the server can apply damage. All right, so if it's not the server, leave. Since it is the server, all right, then we're going to remove the amount of damage taken. Also, this should be the server. The reason being is on our shell controller, if that wasn't the server, we left as well. Only the server could call take damage. So in theory, only the server should be here, but we just want to make sure. So this is just going to subtract some health. Now, if the player is out of health, we set their health to 0, and we call this method RPC died, and then we invoke back to lobby and we leave. RPC died, all right, RPCs, remote procedural calls, all right, are special calls, right? So basically what we're saying is, this is the server. We know it's the server. So when we say, hey, died, we don't want to call the local version of that, right? Because it'll only die locally. What we want to do is we want to say, hey, every instance of this tank on everyone's game, you died, right? If we did it locally, it would just disappear from the server, right? We want it to disappear from everyone's computer, all right? Every version of that's playing this game. So we're going to say RPC died. And so here's that method as the tag client RPC. Notice RPC methods start with the term RPC. And so every version of this tank is going to call this method. So every version of this tank is going to basically say, okay, so find this text object in the scene. We're going to add that in a second. If you are the local player, right? So if this tank died and that's you, well, then you lost. Guess what? You died, all right? If this tank died and that's not you, well, guess what? You won the game. Congratulations. And right now there's only 2 players, so you can either win or lose, basically one or the other. And then back to lobby says, find object of type network lobby manager and run the function server return to lobby. All right, so that's what's happening here. Basically, you either win or you lose, and we're using the RPC, a remote procedure call, to figure that out. All right, and so what I'm going to do here is on my tank, I've already added this tank health. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my scenes, gameplay, matchmaking, and I'm going to add to this some text. So I'm going to go to create UI text, and I can see the text right there. Easiest way to work on this is to pop into 2D mode and zoom out. And so there's really not a whole lot we need to do for this. I just do some cosmetic stuff, like I make the text box bigger. We don't want it to say anything right now, but I'll leave it with its dummy text for just a moment. Center it, make it maybe size 72, and then make it like, I don't know, blue. There we go. And maybe we could choose a different font if we want. There we go. And now that I can see exactly where this will appear, now I can remove that text. All right. And so we have that, and then to make sure it actually works, I'm going to go ahead to my prefab's shell, and all I'm going to do now is say, hey, guess what? You can kill. The enemies have health, so you can kill them. All right, and I'm going to save this here, and I'm going to build this. And I think that I forgot to switch back to the other scene. Nope, it did it for me. Okay, perfect. Because I set that up in the build settings. Thank goodness. All right, so let me hop back on this side here, though, to the network lobby and hit play. And I'll just create a local one again. And I will join here, this local one, and ready up, and ready up. And we've started the game now. And so here's my red tank, here's my blue tank. And let's just say the blue tank's going to win. So there's 1 hit, they have 3 health, there's 2 hits, and then there's 3 hits. I won, the other person lost. 3 seconds later, we go back to the lobby. There is an error here. That error is part of this example. They're fixing it, but it doesn't affect our gameplay. So there we go. So that is our tank health. And so for this step, short step really, we just added the tank health script to the tank prefab. We added this text. We removed the value of that text. And then on the shell controller, we just said, hey, guess what? You can kill people now. There we go. So the very last step, we're almost there. The very last step is we're going to add a deathmatch gameplay mode. All right. And so first off, I'm going to go to my scripts folder, and I have this script called Deathmatch Manager. And the thing is this script doesn't actually need to exist in our scene anywhere. We don't need to add this to anything because everything in it is static. So here's our Deathmatch Manager. It is a network behavior, but it actually doesn't need to be, so I'll probably end up removing that. And in here, we just have a static list of tanks based on this tank health deathmatch. And it has just, again, static methods. So it has add tank, where we pass in a tank and it adds it to our list. We have a longer method named remove tank and check winner. We don't really just want to remove a tank. We want to remove a tank and say, okay, is there anyone left? And so this returns a Boolean. And it says, okay, first off, let's remove that tank. Now, if there is only one tank left, guess what? That's the winner because it's the only one left, so return true. Otherwise, there are more tanks left, return false. And then finally, we have a method here that says, okay, well, give me the winner. And so we just say, okay, if we don't have exactly one tank, then return nothing, right? Because there's been a mistake. Otherwise, return the only element in our tanks list, right? So that's fairly straightforward. Again, they're all static, so I don't actually need to put this script anywhere. it can just leave it not on a game object, right? Because everything in it is static. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my prefabs folder, and on my tank, I'm going to go ahead and remove this tank health script. And instead, I'm going to replace it with this tank health DM for Deathmatch. So let's take a look at the script. Most of this is going to be exactly the same. All right, so tank health is just going to be called tank health DM as opposed to regular tank health. So again, health, information, text, whatever. The big differences are if this is the server, this tank is on the server. All right, then we're going to say, hey, Deathmatch Manager, add this tank. And again, it's a static method, so I don't need a reference to it or anything like that. Just here, added this tank. Inside take damage. All right, when the player dies or when a player dies. All right, so again, we're going to do RPC died just like we did before. And then we're going to say, okay, let's tell the Deathmatch manager. So we're going to say, hey, Deathmatch Manager, remove the tank and check for a winner. So we're going to remove this object from there. If it returns true, then we have a winner. If it returns false, then we don't. If it returns true, then we're going to say, okay, give us the winner. And on the winner, we have a new RPC that's called RPC1, saying, hey, guess what? You won. Congratulations. And then we're going to invoke back to lobby after 3 seconds here. So RPC died changes a little bit. Since when one player loses, the other player wins, and then you leave, now we get a player that loses early, and the rest of the players can keep playing. So we're going to do some stuff here. So first off, we're going to say, hey, hide the tank. All right, and that's a method on tank color that basically just sets them all to clear, basically black. So hide the tank. Let us know it's dead. And then if this is the local player, say, hey, game over, buddy, local player. And then also disable its movement and its shooting, so it can't interfere with the other people playing. On our RPC1, we say, hey, is this the local player? If it is the local player, guess what? You won. And then back to lobby is the same. All right, so to make this work, all right, so I've already put the tank health script on here. I don't need to do anything with the Deathmatch Manager. So the last thing I need to do is on my shell, I just need to say, hey, shell, this is a deathmatch. All right, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and build and run this. All right, and I'm going to have one version of this. I'm also going to go ahead and go to where I built it, and I'm going to run it again. So I have 2 versions running, and then I'm going to hit play here. So I'm going to have 3 players. Okay, and so I will just play and host. I will have another player join and ready up. And I'll have another player join and ready up. I only needed 2 players to say ready, so it's starting up. And so now we have our tanks. And so we've got 3 tanks here. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'll tell you what, on this player, I'm just going to come nuke the server. So, hey, server, you're about to die. 1, 2, 3. Server turns black. The server says game over, so this player can't play anymore. I'm dead, right? And so now it's down to these 2. And so this guy is going to sneak up here. 1, 2, 3. You're dead. He won. He lost. And everyone who's dead turns black. And there we go. So we have our deathmatch game, which will work with as many players as we want to have. And that is going to wrap up this video. A lot longer than I expected. And here we go. So the last thing here is just this thank you and a survey link. Again, that step was inspect the Deathmatch Manager script. Nothing you actually need to do there. Replace tank health with tank health _ DM. And on the shell, just say, hey, this is Deathmatch. All right. And that is this project. And that's the learning cycles. And that's how you should teach it. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, enjoy.